This week on World Traveler Cooking, Žiumaičiu Blynai revisited. These are means Samitogian pancakes in Lithuanian, and these hearty, savory potato pancakes are sort of one of the hallmarks of Lithuanian cuisine. Now, a long time ago, I did a previous video on this dish. But I wasn't super happy with how the sauce came out, and I think I've learned a fair bit about cooking it since then. So I'm going to do a new video for this dish today, and hopefully this is a great improvement over my previous video and can teach many of you some nice things about Lithuanian cuisine. So, let's get started with the ingredients. We have, for the filling, we have some pork. I'll probably use maybe a quarter of this. It doesn't take a lot. And some onions, some salt and some pepper, and then if you like, you can add some seasonings. I'll add some freshly dried marjoram. It was fresh when I bought it, but now it's dried. And that's a lot more fragrant than the dried marjoram that I buy at the store. For the main outside, we have, normally I'd start with 500 grams of potatoes, but some of these are a little bit iffy, so I'm cooking a few extra. Normally I would add 1 egg, but if all these potatoes make it, I might add 2. A heaping tablespoon of each flour and cornstarch, and I might add a little more if all the potatoes make it, but I actually don't think I'll need to because this is a fairly starchy potato. These are older potatoes, and so they should stick together better. One of the cool things is that potatoes become more waxy as they age, so if you use an older potato, very oftentimes you have to use less of a binder. Then for the sauce, I'm going to make a mushroom sauce, so it will have some vegetable oil and mushrooms, onions, and maybe a little bit of flour to thicken it, and some milk. So those are the ingredients. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first step is we will boil our potatoes until they're very tender, and while they're boiling we'll go ahead and cook our meat. So once our pan is hot, we are going to drizzle in a bit of vegetable oil, and we are going to add our onions onto that oil. And stir this around for a minute or so. I got a little piece of onion skin, let's take that out. We will add our meat, salt, pepper, and this doesn't really take very long. You don't really have to wait more than a minute or so. I'm going to add the pork, the freshly dried marjoram, salt, pepper, and then we will fry this until the meat is nicely done. And then one of the secrets to a good sauce is you don't want to avoid having too much of the meat stick to the bottom, but I'm actually going to use this pan directly for the sauce, and so any little pieces of meat stickings will end up incorporated into the sauce on the top of the pancakes. But this is almost done. Turn the heat up a little bit. Want to get it really done. And I'll be back in a moment. Alright, so this is done cooking, so I'm just going to scoop it off, put it on another plate, and I'll set this pan aside for the sauce. So while we're still waiting for the potatoes, I'm going to go ahead and get the sauce done. I've put some oil in. You don't have to wait for the pan to get super hot at this point. But I'm going to go ahead and put the onions in, and once they start to cook a little bit, I'm going to add my mushrooms. Now, I had a very slight change of plans here. I decided to add some sour cream to the sauce to thicken it rather than flour, because that helps avoid a lot of the chalkiness that can come from a flour-based sauce as it cools down. And we're just going to use the onions to deglaze the bottom of the pan a little bit. The onions have plenty of moisture at this point, so that'll help. And then as we add our mushrooms, that'll happen even more. So give this about a minute, and then we'll add our mushrooms. Now, since my potatoes were of different size, I've already taken the smallest ones out because they're very tender. I'm going to wait until the other ones are done, and then we'll keep going. Once the onions are a little translucent, you can add your mushrooms. And we're going to go ahead, I've already sliced these, we're going to go ahead and just let them cook down for a while. That'll take like 10 minutes or so. So don't hurry the mushrooms. If you hurry the mushrooms, you will get a far less tasty result. Mushrooms, as they cook down, develop this wonderful richness of flavor that is really nice. So we're going to go ahead and cook it down. You can compare this to, say, mushroom duxelle, or some other mushroom-based pastes. Obviously, we won't get a paste, but we'll get a very strongly reduced set of mushrooms out of this. So now these mushrooms have cooked way down, as you can see, and they're starting to stick. So I'm going to add a bit of milk and stir this well. So now I've added a little more milk to kind of keep things wet, and I'll probably add a little more yet. But in the meantime, I'm going to add about a third of a can here, nice big dollop of sour cream, and this will thicken our sauce right up. So I'm going to work it in slowly. See how thick that suddenly becomes? And I prefer sour cream as a thickener than flour, just because it doesn't get chalky. So now I'm going to thin this down with a bit of milk. Down to get the desired consistency. And here we have our wonderful, now let me go ahead and taste it. Needs a hair of salt. A bit of pepper won't be bad. So now here is our sauce, and I'm going to set this on the back burner on a very low heat to just keep it warm, and we'll be back for it. So next step is we are going to rice our potatoes. So going to go ahead and throw potatoes into the ricer, and there they go. If you don't have a potato ricer, you need one, and not just for this dish. Potato ricers are really handy for a wide variety of potato dishes, including mashed potatoes. You can get the best, most creamy mashed potatoes using a potato ricer. You note that the old potatoes are quite waxy as they come out, which is really good. That's going to give these a really nice texture. Last one of these. And out became all of our potatoes. So, now we're going to mix our dough, and then we'll get to making the pancakes. So first, I'm going to mix in the flour and the starch. And I'm going to stir this in with my fork. I'm just kind of going to lightly mix it. You don't need to get everything fully incorporated at this stage. Then I'm going to add my eggs, and since I ended up with both, of these, with all the potatoes, I'm going to use both. I'm going to stir this in. And these are going to become very, going to get kind of a nice dough that's going to form. Now from here, we're actually going to mix it and make sure everything's very well incorporated. And you can see, we actually kind of get a dough, but it's kind of very, very sticky. So, to work with this dough, we're going to keep our hands really wet. And I'm going to show you how to form the pancakes, but we're going to get our frying pan hot. Again, I've moved the sauce into a small pan so that I can reuse this frying pan. Once the frying pan's hot, we will get our pancakes started, and I'll be right back. Okay, now that our pan is hot, I'm going to add just a little bit of oil, and I'll spread it around. I just dripped some water in there, so I'm going to keep letting this heat up until it's fully dry, and then I'll be back to start the pancakes. So I already have one of these on here, but I'm going to show you how I make them. I take, a smallish. It's really important to keep this amount small, but I'm going to make a patty. Always work with this with wet hands. Yeah, I need a little more. And I'm going to squish it into a thin patty, which I'm then going to move to my other hand. Now, if it just doesn't work, that's a good indication that maybe your hands aren't quite wet enough. Once you kind of get it into a shape like this, we're going to put we're just going to sprinkle a little bit of meat on top. I'm going to take a little bit of this dough, and I'm just going to put some pieces of it around the outside. And then I'm going to rinse my fingers again. And then I'm going to close it using water from my fingers. If there's spots that don't close, I just grab a little more of this, and then, see, these fingers aren't quite wet enough, but this will work. Once I have this narrow patty here, then I'm going to drop it on the oil like this, and we'll cook it for several minutes on each side. And when it's done, I'll be back, and then we'll plate. So this one's now ready to flip, and we're going to cook it here for a few more minutes, and then we'll be back. And now to plate. I am actually going to wait until the third one's done to add the sauce, but I've chosen a red plate here to contrast with the sort of browns and yellows on this dish. Once the third one is done, I will put the sauce on and garnish it. So now that I have these done, I'm going to spoon over some of this mushroom sauce. And I've added a little more milk and a little bit more sour cream to add a little bit more sauce to this. And I'm just going to spoon the mushroom sauce over. And then from here, I'm going to garnish it. And I will garnish it with some dill. Dill is always an appropriate garnish on Lithuanian food. And so I'm going to sprinkle a little bit around here, and then I'll just put a central tuft in the middle. And here we have it. Next up, the taste test. And now for the taste test. I'm going to try a bit here without the mushroom first, with just the sauce. So what's interesting about this is this doesn't have a lot of meat, but the meat in it definitely adds texture and a bit of flavor. Now I'm going to try with the mushroom. So with the mushroom, we get even more flavor, we get even more texture. It's actually really delightful. This is definitely a hearty meal. It's definitely appropriate for fall and winter, not so much for summer. But in that context, it's really good. Also really good if you're about to do like heavy work, like work in the fields or go take a long walk or something. So if you like this content or you find it interesting, I hope I've earned a like and a subscription from you. Please also check the notification bell to get notified of any new videos I make. And also feel free to comment about anything you would do differently or you like in this dish that would be done differently. I think that adds a lot of value to any other person coming and trying to figure out how to make these dishes. But at any rate, you know, I always keep the recipe in the description. So bon appetit and see you next week.